The fluorescent lights in the briefing room gave everything a flat, sterile glow. But the mood was anything but quiet. Laughter carried easily from the front row, where 3 pilots leaned back in their chairs, swapping half-serious boasts over energy drinks. Their flight suits were unzipped to the chest, patch displayed like trophies, each man interrupting the other with the easy arrogance of those certain they belonged. One tapped his boot against the leg of the chair, keeping rhythm with the quick banter. The air buzzed with that familiar blend of dismissive camaraderie, a place where belonging was measured by volume more than substance. Zephyrin Adair sat 2 rows back, posture straight, eyes lowered to the tablet balanced on her lap. The device glowed faintly, its screen filled with flight manuals and tactical notes. Entire sections highlighted in sharp blocks of yellow. She moved her finger across the surface in a slow, deliberate motion, scrolling line by line as if each word mattered. Her chestnut hair was pulled neatly into regulation form, not a strand out of place. The precision of her gestures betrayed none of what lingered underneath. Every movement was calculated, every reaction controlled. When Captain Mercer entered, the room shifted in a wave of mock attention. He was authoritative without effort. Shoulders squared, voice clipped, eyes already on the notes in his hand. He carried himself with the assurance of a man whose decisions would not be questioned. The pilots snapped upright with exaggerated speed. Smirks exchanged between them as they muttered in low tones. Mercer called the room to order and began reading out assignments, his tone pragmatic, detached, never once looking at the faces in front of him longer than necessary. The names were listed quickly: patrol sectors, flight rotations, maintenance standbys, each order spoken like a box being checked. When Zephyrin's name came, it was delivered without pause. Logistics support, equipment oversight, and readiness reporting. Not one mention of flight status. No recognition of the medals that weighed subtly on her uniform. 3. Distinguished flying crosses, aligned in silence against the fabric of her chest. They might as well have been invisible. Hargrave leaned back in his chair, a crooked grin cutting across his face. He let his voice carry just enough to be heard by everyone. Why give baggage a call sign? The words hung in the air, dripping with amusement. A ripple of quiet laughter followed from the other pilots. Not loud, not cruel, but dismissive in that easy, cutting way that stings worse than open contempt. Zephyrin did not look up. Her finger moved to the next section on her tablet. She highlighted a passage and made a small notation in the margin, her handwriting crisp and exact. The gesture seemed almost casual, but the set of her jaw told a different story. Fire smoldered beneath her calm, hidden under layers of restraint honed over years. Mercer ignored the exchange, his eyes still on his clipboard. He moved on to the next assignment, never acknowledging the sting of Hargrave's words, never noticing the metal cluster that should have silenced such talk. To him, she was simply another name. Another officer filling a gap. Authoritative, indifferent, pragmatic. The whiteboard roster at the side of the room displayed the call signs for the week. Bold names were written in thick marker across most of the board. But near the bottom, her own call sign appeared faint, almost like an afterthought, squeezed into the margin. It was a quiet reminder of how the institution had chosen to see her not as a pilot with history written in flight hours and scars, but as a placeholder. The briefing ended with laughter still echoing from the front rows, pilots filing out in small clusters, voices raised in casual competition. Hargrave passed close by, giving her a glance that was more smirk than recognition. Zephyrin closed the cover on her tablet. Rising with deliberate calm, the medals on her chest caught the light as she straightened it. Though no one turned to notice, she walked from the room in silence, her steps even, her expression controlled, carrying within her the quiet determination of someone who had endured erasure so long it had become habit. She knew the institution saw only what it wanted. It mistook silence for absence and calm for weakness. Yet the fire remained, banked and waiting. ready for the moment when competence no longer hid behind noise. The USS Constellation moved steadily across the South China Sea, its deck alive, with the clang of tools and the deep-throated rumble of turbines. Salt air carried through the open spaces, mixing with the sharper scent of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid. Below decks, the atmosphere was busier still, every corridor lit with pale industrial light. Shadows cutting across rows of storage crates, marked in black serial codes. Order was meant to govern everything, but it was an order that often frayed at the edges. Zephyr Adair worked in the quiet gaps, where others did not look. Sleeves rolled neatly to the elbow. She moved through the maintenance spaces, with a digital slate pressed firmly against her arm, entering corrections and cross-checking figures. Her handwriting appeared in precise lines across the screen, each note exact. The clipboard had become an extension of her, another instrument of discipline. She had learned to find small flaws before they became dangerous. That morning, it was a line on a hydraulic checklist, a specification others had passed without a glance. She spotted the error, marked it, and quietly handed it back. A small correction, but one that meant the difference between a landing gear locking smoothly or seizing under pressure. Chief Lawson, a veteran with grease under his nails and a voice like gravel, studied her notation longer than most. His eyes narrowed. Then he gave the faintest nod, sliding the corrected sheet into the proper stack. He did not say much, but when he looked at her, it carried the weight of acknowledgement. In a world where words were often wasted, a glance from him meant respect. Above deck, the rhythm of work continued. Pilots gathered in the ready room, their voices raised in easy conversation. They spoke about maneuvers and weekend bets, their dismissive laughter carrying easily across the cramped space. Someone mentioned her name, followed by a chuckle. The logistics girl fixed a checklist again. The remark earned a few smirks. They did not notice that the same correction could keep their aircraft from breaking apart in midair. They had already decided what she was, and nothing would shift that image. Later that evening, Intelligence Officer Nyota stepped into the hangar where Z was reviewing inventory tags. Nyota carried herself differently than the others. Her eyes sharp, her expression measured, as though she was cataloging more than she let on. She watched Z for a long moment before speaking. "You were thorough today. More thorough than most?" Her tone was light but edged with curiosity. She seemed to know that Z's quiet diligence was not the whole story. A hint passed between them, unspoken, but clear there was more to Zephyr Adair than the slate in her hands. Z only offered a faint smile and turned back to her work. She had no interest in revealing her past test flights, no intention of letting her history become fuel for gossip. It was easier, safer, to remain invisible. The carrier continued its rhythm, steel against sea, noise filling every corner. Yet beneath that noise, it was Z who held the order together. Each notation, each correction, unseen but essential. The sea stretched outward in every direction, the USS Constellation steady against the swells, as clouds gathered low on the horizon. From the windows of the briefing room, the light was pale and washed out. Yet inside the air carried a tension that words did not fully capture. Maps glowed on the wall, their surfaces painted with wide red arcs, showing potential strike ranges. Officers spoke quickly, their attention fixed on carrier groups and surface fleets, their words heavy with the confidence of men who believed they understood the threat in front of them. Zephyr Adair sat off to the side, her chair in the shadow of a bulkhead, tablet balanced on her knee. She traced her finger over the digital pages of a tactical manual, her eyes sharp and focused. She saw more than the others noticed patterns in intercept diagrams, weaknesses in the spacing of patrol cycles, probabilities tucked between lines of data. She refined her own ideas in silence, knowing no one had asked for them, knowing they would be brushed aside if spoken aloud. The intelligence officer clicked through slides, each one displaying images of Chinese J-20 variants. The fighter silhouettes cut against the screen in cold shapes, their angles sharp, their capabilities rumored to be advancing faster than expected. The speaker's tone was measured, but the undertone was clear. The fleet was vulnerable, especially when patrols drifted too far. Around the table, the men muttered in response, debating ranges and sortie endurance. Their conversations circling in the same narrow track. Zephrine made a note in her manual, refining an intercept sequence that might cut their losses. But she kept her thoughts to herself. Speaking would only earn another dismissal. When the room emptied, she lingered, reviewing her calculations in the dimming light. The storm clouds outside thickened, wind rattling faintly against the glass. She adjusted a diagram on her slate and almost did not hear the steps approach until the voice broke the silence. Still playing with simulations, the words belonged to Executive Officer Thacker. His tone clipped, his eyes narrowing on her screen. He stood with arms folded. Annoyance clear. We need logistics reports, not daydreams. Zephrine closed the manual slowly, her expression calm. Herr Gestur is precise? She did not answer his jab, only rose to her feet and gave a small nod, tucking the slate under her arm. Silence was safer than engagement. He shook his head and walked away, muttering under his breath, leaving her alone once more. The ship intercom crackled to life moments later. The first alarm cut through the stillness like a blade. Klaxons wailed across the deck, their echo deep and metallic. Unidentified aircraft had been detected inbound, their vector closing faster than expected. Officers ran through the passageways, boots hammering against the metal floor, voices rising as orders were relayed. Zephrine stood motionless for an instant, her slate pressed tightly to her chest. The red arcs she had studied now felt less like abstract diagrams and more like the edges of reality pressing in. She had seen the storm forming long before the others looked up. The bridge of the USS Constellation was already shaking with noise before the alarm finished its first cycle. Radar sweeps lit the screens with 3 red arcs moving toward the carrier group. Fast and deliberate. They were J-20 variants. Sharp-edged shadows armed with missiles. The ship's defenses could not blunt in time. Voices clashed as officers tried to thread impossible solutions. The combat air patrol was out of reach, too far to turn back. Sea Sparrows and close-in guns would cut down some of the strike, but not enough. The calculations sat on every face. The carrier was open. Captain Mercer gripped the railing and shouted orders to recompute intercept windows. The Admiral remained silent, his stillness heavier than the storm of voices. Screens blinked, each pulse a reminder of closing distance. No one noticed when Zephrine Adair stepped back from her console. She walked out quietly, movements smooth, slate pressed against her ribs as if nothing was unusual. Down the passageway, the alarm softened to a metallic echo. She descended 2 ladders, boots meeting steel with measured rhythm, and slipped into the locker deck. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Her locker door opened with a muted click. Inside, folded with care, hung the black advanced flight suit that had not been touched in months. Next to it rested a slim case that held the neural interface node. She pulled the suit over her body with steady hands, the fabric tightening across her frame until it seemed to erase the uniform she had been forced to wear. The zipper closed, sealing her into another life. She lifted the node and pressed it to the base of her skull. The surge struck instantly. Pain spread down her spine like lightning conducted through bone. Herfingerstrempel. For one breath, she felt blinded. Then the world reformed with edges too sharp to be coincidence. The tremor faded. The connection held. Her footsteps carried her through the maintenance corridor toward the hangar. Sailors moved in hurried streams, glancing but not stopping her. A junior deckhand finally stepped in her path, confusion flickering when he saw the suit. He asked for clearance. Voice half command, half fear. She showed him the small card, spoke the words with calm precision. Omega 729. The code leapt across his handheld. His mouth opened, closed. Then he stepped aside so quickly he nearly stumbled. The path was hers. The Wraith waited beneath hangar lights. The aircraft looked less like metal than distilled shadow, edges catching the light and returning nothing but suggestion. Mechanics froze, uncertain, then moved back as the deckhand shouted her code. She climbed the ladder. Her movements economical. Canopy, sliding open with a whisper. The cockpit greeted her as though memory had been waiting. She settled into the seat, hands finding controls like a language never lost. The neural handshake surged again. Systems came alive inside her thoughts. Power rose like pressure behind her ribs. Surfaces shifted with the faintest weight of her wrists. She conducted a rapid pre-flight. Motion clipped. No hesitation. Orders rang in her headset demanding immediate shutdown. Captain Mercer's voice cut through, sharp enough to flinch metal. She keyed her mic with steady tone. Constellation. This is Wraith. Clear the airspace. On the bridge, Mercer slammed the railing, rage spilling into questions no one could answer. Who had authorized this? The Admiral stayed motionless, eyes fixed on the scope where one blue icon prepared to rise. Officers murmured disbelief. The air felt suspended between anger and awe. Back in the hangar, the turbines spooled, starting as a thin whine that swelled into a deep vibration felt through the deck. Heat shimmered behind the exhaust. Dust lifted in eddies. The launch officer, pale but bound by procedure, raised his signal. The catapult clamped into place. The moment stretched like drawn wire. Zephyrin steadied her breathing. Pain at the node cooled into clarity. She lowered her visor. The deck blurred beneath her. Then the catapult struck. The Wraith tore forward, canopy catching a brief flare of firelight, and the sea opened wide. She pulled power, engines howling into sky. The ship fell away, shrinking into geometry, while the radar showed blue racing to meet red. On the bridge, the silence that followed was heavier than all the alarms. Mercer's fury faltered. The Admiral did not speak. They watched the impossible unfold. The sky above the South China Sea cracked open as the Wraith surged upward. Zephyrin Adair pressed herself into the seat, the neural interface humming in rhythm with her pulse. Engines cold, heat baffles aligned. She climbed almost vertical, the fuselage cutting clean into the thin light. The sun hung behind her, swallowing the aircraft into brilliance until she was only a distortion line, nearly invisible against the burning horizon. Below, the carrier group lay small on the steel-blue water, its decks crowded with men and machinery frozen between awe and fear. The 3 J-22 swept in, their formation tight, sleek shapes gleaming with confidence. Their intent was clear: dive on the carrier, fire their payload, and retreat into the cover of distance. But the pattern fractured the moment she dropped back down. Zephyrin inverted and fell into their line, the Wraith's airframe twisting with uncanny grace, breaking the triad wide open. Neural input lit across her vision as predictive traces flickered like ghosts of future maneuvers. The machine fed her possibilities. She chose the narrowest one and committed. The first kill came fast. A Fox 3 call echoed in her headset, the missile streaking forward like a sliver of fire. It tore through cloud and found the lead fighter before its pilot had time to counter. The explosion ripped open the sky, scattering smoke and fragments, flame briefly visible before the wind swallowed it. On the bridge of the Constellation, officers froze, their eyes wide, the radar screens lighting up with one red contact blinking into nothing. The second duel unfolded within seconds. One of the remaining J-22 rolled sharp to port, trying to flank. Zephyrin let her body lean into the neural sync, feeling the vector shift before the thought finished forming. The Wraith's nozzles swiveled with an impossible angle, thrust vectoring so sharp the G-force clawed her into the seat. Her vision tunneled at the edges. Gray fog, threatening. She gritted her teeth, fingers tightening, and let the machine carry the stress into its structure. Her body strained but did not break. She inverted hard, cut across the J-20's path, and released another missile. It met the fighter at point-blank range. For an instant, the two contrails crossed in an X, one vanishing into fire, the other straight into the open sky. On the carrier, Voici disbelieving, calling it an impossible maneuver. Captain Mercer's rage had been replaced with stunned silence. Even the Admiral leaned forward, lips pressed tight, watching the lone blue icon maneuver like nothing human. Radar technicians whispered to each other that no pilot could pull those numbers. Yet the evidence burned across their screens. The third fight lasted longer. The last J-20 circled wide. Pilote cautious now, his confidence tempered by shock. He climbed, feinted, dove, probing for weakness. Zephyrin steadied her breathing. Her hands trembled faintly, but her mind stayed clear. Each flicker of the neural interface resolving into predictive trails. She let the duel unfold like a chess game in the clouds. Every move measured, every counter prepared. Patience stretched thin. Contrails crossed and rewrote themselves. Ghostly white scars etched across the deep blue sky. The J-20 lunged at last, committing to a dive and missile lock. Zephyrin rolled under. Let the missile's warning scream in her ear. Then cut power until the Wraith slid almost weightless. The enemy overshot, climbing too fast. Caught in the opening he had created, she pressed the trigger. The missile left her wing in clean silence and found its mark with unerring precision. The explosion lit the underside of the clouds. A bloom of orange and black, scattering across the horizon. She exhaled slowly, letting the tremor leave her fingertips. The neural link hummed quieter now, systems leveling with the rhythm of her own pulse. The sky was empty again, the ocean stretching wide beneath, the fleet alive and untouched. Above the carrier, silence fell harder than the klaxons had ever rung. Officers stood at their stations, unable to reconcile what they had seen with the woman they had dismissed as baggage only hours before. On the radar screen, 3 red marks had vanished. 1 blue icon remained, steady, unshaken, orbiting above them like a sentinel. Zephyrin's voice came calm through the channel. Constellation. The threat is neutralized. No boast. No triumph. Only fact. The bridge answered with silence. Even Captain Mercer had no words. The Admiral's eyes did not move from the display around them. Men struggled to understand, but the truth had been written in contrails across the sky. Mastery had needed no validation. The battlefield had silenced all doubt. The roar of the turbines faded into a heavy stillness. The Wraith rolled to a halt on the wide gray deck of the USS Constellation, steam hissing from the catapult rails behind it. For a moment, no one moved. The carrier crew stood fixed where they were. Helmets and goggles turned toward the black shape that had returned from the sky. The air smelled of salt and burned fuel, the wind tugging faintly at uniforms. Only the sound of the engines winding down filled the silence. A slow heartbeat that seemed reluctant to end. The canopy eased open with hydraulic grace. Zephyrin Adair sat in stillness for a breath, then unlatched her harness and rose. She moved without flourish. No gesture of triumph. No smile to claim victory. She descended the ladder rung by rung, each step deliberate. Her expression unreadable. The neural node was hidden beneath her collar, the only evidence of what she had carried into the fight concealed again. To the crew, it looked as though she had stepped out of myth back into flesh. Captain Mercer broke first. Striding forward, fury etched deep across his face. His voice cut sharp against the quiet. Who gave you authorization? You endangered this ship. This crew. His words faltered, undermined by the very fact that the carrier still floated unharmed beneath a clear sky. He gripped his gloves tight, demanding anger to fill the space where doubt had already crept. Zephyrin stood before him, calm, hands at her sides. Her reply was steady, almost quiet, yet it carried. Project Wraith is an evaluation program. Today's sortie was its demonstration. She gave no embellishment, no defense. Only the truth she was permitted to reveal. Mercer's jaw worked as if he wanted to tear it apart. But the certainty in her voice eroded his outrage. From the gathered line of pilots, Hargrave stepped forward. The smirk he once carried had drained away. His helmet hung loose at his side, knuckles white around the strap. For a long moment he said nothing, his gaze searching her face as if looking for the weakness he had always assumed was there. At last, he drew a breath and extended his hand. His voice, low and strained, carried more weight than his bluster ever had. "I misjudged you. That was beyond anything I've ever seen." The gesture hung in the air, fragile yet undeniable. Zephyrin regarded it with the same calm she had worn since stepping from the cockpit. She accepted it with a simple clasp, firm and brief. No more acknowledgement than was necessary. The reversal was complete. But she neither gloated nor softened. Respect would be earned by action alone. Then came the sound of polished shoes on steel. Admiral Levesque crossed the deck. His deep navy uniform cut against the backdrop of machinery, gold trim catching the late sun. Conversations stilled as his presence carried through the gathered crew. He stopped beside Mercer, his eyes fixed on Zephyrin. The silence pressed down once more. When he spoke, his words were few, measured, decisive. Lieutenant Commander Adair is not baggage. She is the chief test pilot and lead architect of Project Wraith. Every maneuver you witnessed today was the product of years kept off record, for reasons beyond your clearance. That changes now. A murmur rippled across the deck crew. Disbelief, giving way to recognition. Men who had mocked her name hours before stood in silence. The weight of authority and proof forcing their perception to shift. Mercer looked stricken, torn between protest and obedience. Yet he bowed his head a fraction, conceding what could no longer be denied. Zephyrin said nothing. She let the silence hold. The truth carried not by her voice, but by the contrails, still fading above them, and the wreckage sinking far away in the sea. The sun dipped lower across the horizon, casting a pale fire over the deck of the USS Constellation. The aftermath of battle still lingered in the air, the smell of burned jet fuel, the faint scorch of rubber from emergency stops, the ghost of contrails fading into nothing above. Officers and crew stood in formation, their attention fixed on Admiral Levesque as he addressed them from the raised platform near the island structure. His uniform caught the light, gold trim, glinting, like a reminder of authority reshaped in an instant. Phase 2 begins now. His voice carried, clipped and unyielding. Project Wraith will be integrated into this fleet as an operational mandate. Neural interface units will be trained and assigned under the new tactical division. Command will fall to Lieutenant Commander Zephyrin Adair. He paused, letting the words sink into every corner of the deck. Selection will begin immediately. You know the risks. 60% of candidates wash out, no exceptions. The words shifted the entire atmosphere. Men who had carried themselves with casual arrogance only days before stood rigid, their expressions flickering between awe, fear, and reluctant respect. The hierarchy they had known had been overturned not by speech or politics, but by the undeniable truth of survival. The carrier floated intact because of her. The Admiral's announcement only made official what the battlefield had already declared. Zephyrin stood slightly behind, and to the side of the Admiral, her posture composed, hands folded behind her back. She did not speak, did not acknowledge the whispers running through the gathered line of aviators, yet her presence held more weight than any order given. The silence around her was not the silence of dismissal anymore, it was the silence of recognition, of men adjusting to a reality they could not contest. That evening, the first group of pilots lined up for the candidate screening. The hangar had been cleared to hold the equipment. Rows of simulation chairs were set under bright industrial lights, each fitted with the neural node interface. Technicians moved quietly among them, calibrating systems, checking vitals. The chairs themselves looked almost surgical, their restraint harnesses and cold metal frames transforming confidence into vulnerability. The volunteers entered one by one, their bravado muted. Some clutched their helmets, as if seeking comfort. Others kept their arms rigid at their sides. They had mocked her once, but now each man understood what it meant to step into the world she had endured alone. Nervous energy filled the air, a current that no one voiced but all felt. Zephrine oversaw the preparations without comment. She watched as the first candidates settled into the chairs. Electrodes and nodes pressed against their temples and the base of their skulls. The moment the interface activated, bodies jerk it slightly. Tremors running through arms and legs as the system forced adaptation. The technicians monitored with steady professionalism, yet the strain showed immediately. Breathing quickened. Eyes shut tight against the pulse of signals, forcing themselves into human thought. Failure was visible within minutes. One pilot tore free of his harness, sweat streaking down his face, his voice breaking as he refused to continue. Another slumped forward, unconscious. Medical staff moving in swiftly to carry him out. The Admiral's 60% was no exaggeration. The process was brutal. The room grew quieter as each volunteer watched, the weight of what they had signed for settling into their bones. Then Hargrave stepped forward. The same man whose smirk had once carried dismissal now moved with a sober determination. He handed his signed volunteer form to the technician without flourish. His jaw was tight, his shoulders squared, but there was no arrogance left in him. When his eyes briefly met Zephrine's across the hangar, he gave the faintest nod. Not apology, not excuse, only respect. Quiet and unspoken, he climbed into the chair, the harness locking across his chest, the neural node pressed into place. For a moment, his fists clenched until his knuckles whitened. Then the system activated. His body shuddered under the strain, every muscle resisting. But he did not cry out. He held the pressure, riding the storm she had once carried alone. Zephrine watched, her face calm, giving no outward sign of approval or doubt. Yet inside, she recognized the shift. Authority was not bestowed by rank or medals. It was forged in the crucible of survival, proven in the sky, and now carried forward into those willing to follow. The Admiral signed the Phase 2 order on his clipboard, the pen scratching finality into paper. The program was no longer hidden, no longer whispered. It belonged to the fleet now. By nightfall, the deck had transformed from a place of disbelief into a place of training, where silence once erased her. Silence now surrounded her with respect. Those who had mocked her lined up to face the same burden she had borne. The reversal was complete. The hum of the carrier was muted at night, a steady vibration through steel that never truly ceased. In her cabin, Zephrine Adair sat before the terminal, its screen casting a pale glow across the narrow space. The metal cluster that could have demanded attention lay tucked away inside a drawer, unseen and unspoken. She typed her mission report with methodical precision, fingers moving steadily across the keys. Every maneuver, every signal, every detail of the engagement with the J-22nd was recorded without embellishment. The report was not for applause or recognition. It was duty, and duty never paused to consider whether anyone was watching. She leaned back briefly, rubbing at the faint ache left by the neural interface. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the hum of ventilation. She thought of the pilots who had once mocked her name, of the sudden reversal that had forced them to see what silence had hidden. She did not smile, did not indulge triumph. Her mind turned instead to the truth she had always known. Talent did not need to announce itself, nor demand attention. It only needed to endure long enough for truth to emerge. The next morning, the ready room held 40 pilots packed into its closed walls, every seat filled, every eye fixed on the projection screen at the front. The footage of the previous day's battle played in sharp detail: the vertical climb, the sudden drop into the enemy formation, the kills executed with impossible precision. Not one voice interrupted. The usual mutters and laughter that filled these spaces were gone. Only silence carried through the room. Zephyrin stood at the podium, her posture composed, her voice steady. "What you see here is not about reflexes," she said, her tone calm, her gaze sweeping the room. "It is about how your mind adapts to what the system gives you. Neural synchronization is not speed. It is alignment. Those who succeed will learn to let the interface extend your thought. Those who fail will fight it, and the fight will break them." Her words were simple, direct. There was no flourish, no attempt to inspire through grandeur. Yet in their restraint, they carried more weight than any speech of fire or fury. The pilots listened as if the air itself might shatter if they spoke out of turn. Some shifted uneasily. Others leaned forward, trying to catch every syllable. Hargrave sat near the front, eyes intent, his expression stripped of arrogance. When the footage ended, she shut down the projector and left the silence to linger. She offered no closing remarks, no dramatic flourish. Instead, she let the reality of what they had seen settle in their minds. It was lesson enough. By evening, the carrier deck shifted into a scene of transformation. The horizon burned orange with the sinking sun, waves catching light in steel-blue ripples. A heavy helicopter approached, its rotors chopping through the salt air, and settled onto the deck with a thundering roar. Deck crew swarmed as the cargo bay opened, revealing crates stenciled with a single word in stark letters, WRAIAT. Forklifts rolled the crates into neat lines, their markings visible even in the fading light. Alongside them came sealed containers holding new neural units, their faint warning labels reminding all who looked that the program was no ordinary assignment. Young pilots gathered in clusters near the railings, their voices low, their words carrying a mixture of fear and reverence. One name threaded quietly among them, repeated in awe and disbelief. Wraith. It no longer sounded like mockery. It sounded like myth. Zephyrin stood apart from them. At the edge of the deck, the wind tugged at her hair, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun met the vast line of sea. Her silhouette was stark against the light, a figure neither triumphant nor defeated, but enduring. She did not need to turn toward the whispers behind her. The echo of her call sign would spread with or without her acknowledgement. In the quiet, she accepted the weight that had shifted onto her shoulders. The burden of leadership was no longer something denied, but something demanded. She would carry it without fanfare, just as she always had. The sunset bled across the waves, the horizon opening into tomorrow. And in that moment, her silence spoke louder than any accolade, leaving a mark that would outlast every voice.